Global Systems Project by Aaron and Harcia.
Paris is located in the temperate deciduous forest biome. Found mainly in Asia, East North America, and Europe's middle, deciduous forest biome consists of 4 seasons, which are spring, summer, fall, and winter. Summer is the biome's driest season, and spring is the wettest. Summer in a deciduous forest biome commonly begins early June and ends late August. The climate graph on the right side includes useful information. It also includes the average amount of rainfall per month, which the graph on the right does not include. From the graph, we can confirm that the driest months are during the summer season and the wettest season is during the spring. Referencing the graph on the left, it appears that the warmer months are during June, July, and August. After the summer months, the average temperature plummets to about 7.5 Celsius, at a steady but steep decline. Something interesting is that the average temperature increases from January to around the end of May. We can see the average amount of rainfall rising along with the temperature. Then, the rainfall drops significantly, but the temperature is still rising. This data indicates that the conditions would be slightly dry, increasing the chances of wildfire or drought. The temperature graph we have created on the right indicates that there has been a steady yet slow increase of the average temperature in Paris. Climate change has been a significant issue in biomes, and Paris is no exception. Since 1885, Paris's overall temperature has increased to 14 degrees Celsius, and since then there has been more heat waves too. Heat waves and excess amounts of rain will become far more common in the decades to come, which can even cause floods. This may not seem like a significant increase in temperature, but with climate change, the temperature is increasing faster than the animals and plants could adapt.
Introduction to Kiev's biome. Kiev, Ukraine is situated in the Eastern European forest steppe biome, of which encompasses Moldova, Russia, and Romania. The biome consists of, as suggested by its name, forest and steppe, although it has gone through much deforestation. It is now primarily a grassland, and large parts of it are used for agriculture. Kiev consists of 4 primary seasons, winter months being from mid-November to mid-March, and summer months from mid-May to early September. Kiev is described as a place with a temperate continental climate and is not too dry nor humid. As shown by the climatograph, Kiev is a relatively dry place, having an average of a little more than 90 millimeters of rain at its wettest. It also tends to rain more in the warmer months of June and July, being otherwise consistent in terms of rainfall. We can see that August is one of the warmer months, yet the amount of rainfall is, in relation to earlier trends, quite little. This indicates that it's likely that droughts have happened or might happen often in the month of August. Kiev is less susceptible to climate change as other places may be, but as the temperature graph suggests, it is still present. Climatographs provide us with the average rainfall as well as temperature each month for every year, while the clearest information we can get from the temperature versus time graph is a general trend in temperature over a long period of time. When comparing two different cities, climatographs are more useful as they provide a more accurate and visual representation of statistics and thus allow us to easily identify patterns. The temperature graphs we made compared the record ID or the time to the temperature. This information gives us a graph that provides a general idea of how temperature trends vary over time and help identify any existing outliers. We can tell from both of these graphs that the trend line has an upward slope, and although the trend change is not too remarkable, it indicates that climate change is currently ongoing and likely will continue in the future. This biome in particular is not as susceptible to climate change as others may be because of its location and altitude. Still, temperature and precipitation has changed drastically in the area under the influence of climate change, with an also increasing number of natural disasters. In the southern regions of Moldova, precipitation has decreased and droughts have occurred, which can be expected to increase in extremity with climate change. On the other hand, northern regions will experience the opposite, where an increase in precipitation will cause floods, which too can be expected to worsen. In a span of 20 to 30 years in Ukraine, The average temperature in the region has increased by 0.5 degrees Celsius, and the rate temperatures are increasing has only gone faster in the past couple decades. Annually, the average air temperature has increased by around 1 degree Celsius since 1950, and the amount of precipitation has increased about 10 millimeters since then. The main cause of climate change in this biome is related to greenhouse gas emissions, primarily rooting from Ukraine. It is becoming an industrial country, which is why it has agreed to reduce its emissions by 50% by 2050 from 1990. So far, it has already surpassed this goal, cutting back on 61% of emissions since 1990. However, even if Ukraine continues to lower its emissions at the current rate, it can be expected that the average temperature will continue to rise. Although it has been cutting back on emissions for decades, there has still been an increase in average temperature in the area. While this does mean that the warmth will allow for more productivity in forests, it also increases the likelihood of forest fires. Other events that may reoccur are floods and heat waves, as well as breaking air temperature records and having new highs.
During the 20th century, France had about 30% greater than the average warming throughout the globe, their annual temperature being 0.95 Celsius compared to the 0.74 Celsius increase globally. In 1885, the temperature was 10.7 Celsius, and in 2020, the average temperature was 13.1 Celsius in France. And estimations say the temperature will rise around 14.5 Celsius in 2085. Amounts of rainfall is also steadily increasing. In 1885, Paris only had 551 millimeters of rainfall, but estimations say that by 2030 we will have around 633 millimeters of rainfall. Autumn and winter rainfall have been increased between 5 and 35%, while rainfall in the summer dropped. In the years to come, the rain will become more intense, frequent, and extended. Additionally, climate change will increase the risk of flooding and rising sea levels. The main cause of climate change in Paris is caused by non-industrial sectors, which make up around 82% of the emissions. The second biggest emission contributor is industrial sectors, which make up 17.6% of the French total energy consumption. France has set a goal to get at least 32% of consumed energy to be from renewable sources by 2030. By 2030, France has strived to reduce all of its emissions below 40% of the emissions created in 1990. And by 2040, France hopes to reach a net emission of zero. As quoted by Professor John Weings from the University of Arizona, we found that, on average, species usually adapt to different climatic conditions at a rate of only by about 1 Celsius per million years. But if global temperatures are going to rise by about 4 degrees over the next 100 years, as predicted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is where we get a huge difference in rates. What that suggests overall is that simply evolving to match these conditions may not be an option for many species. In shorter terms, species can only adapt to climate change on average at a rate of 1 degree Celsius per 1 million years. If the average global temperature were to progress according to our predictions, many species would be unable to survive the conditions. With the increasing temperature, many species cannot adjust and adapt as quickly and are becoming at risk of extinction. One such species is the European mink, which are critically endangered as of today. Since the mid-19th century, the population of European minks have been reduced by over 97% because of habit loss, illegal hunting, and impact of American mink species. The impact of human activities and climate change has the most significant impact. Because of climate change, temperate deciduous forests have been experiencing milder winters, which may suffer from an increased amount of pathogens and tree-killing pests, reducing the habitat for species. With higher temperatures, drought is more common, and trees can't photosynthesize properly in the extreme heat. In general, climate change has made dry regions even drier and wet regions even wetter. This change is especially damaging to this biome because as an increased frequency of ice storms accumulates ice, which can create irreplaceable damage on hardwoods, causing habitat loss. Humans introducing new non-native species to the biome also has an effect on the adaptation of the current species in the environment. As seen with the European mink, as American mink were introduced to the biome through the fur industry, it quickly became an invasive species, displacing the native current species. What is the Paris Agreement? The Paris Agreement is a legally binding international treaty on climate change. It was adopted on December 12, 2015 by 196 parties at COP, including France and Ukraine. The goal of the Paris Agreement is to limit global warming to below preferably 1.5 degrees Celsius. Every 5 years, the countries' commitments are reviewed, each cycle being increasingly ambitious climate action to carry out by the countries. Each country is also expected to submit a NDC, Nationally Determined Contribution, which is an updated national climate action plan every 5 years. According to the Paris Agreement, in order to keep global warming under 1.5 degrees by 2030, countries must cut emissions by 45% or more compared to the emission levels in 2010.
As less industrial countries grow, it's almost impossible not to burn fossil fuels. This is one of the most prominent reasons for climate change, as the burning of fossil fuels produces greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane. It is difficult to convince other countries' progression, so we need to place our hopes in technological improvements. In the Eastern European forest steppe biome, one of the more tedious ways to mitigate is to restore forests and plant trees. This would be inconvenient, though, as much of the land is used for agriculture and our benefit. However, all possible solutions are currently way too costly or inconvenient, which is why we as individuals must contribute. We can choose to have less luxurious, more sustainable lifestyles, or we can invest in renewable energy rather than fossil fuels. Some of the smaller things we might be able to do would be to change our diet to something less meat based or even go smaller and just try to spread awareness of what's happening and how to stop it.
How can we restore deforestation? There are two methods we can use to restore deforestation, which are natural regeneration, also known as passive regeneration, and active restoration. Natural regeneration is relatively easy to execute because very little action and management is required. This type of restoration is favored in partially logged and or disturbed forests. From secondary succession, the soil in these forests keep most of their original nutrients, which makes favorable conditions for passive regeneration. However, the cons of passive regeneration is that it can only be most advantageous in small areas surrounded by native forests, and it is slow for growth to reach the original status of the forest. Alternatively, active restoration is utilized when the conditions cannot allow natural restoration to happen. For example, areas that have been logged quite a bit will have very little capacity to naturally regenerate. One method in active restoration is seed dispersal. However, this method will require animals to disperse the seeds, but the animals generally avoid open areas. We must select preferably a native species and pay attention to soil conditions for this method to work. If the soil conditions are not favorable, the seedling's survival becomes low. For areas that do not allow regeneration from seeds, we can outplant, which is basically planting saplings, which can be very expensive and labor intensive.
How humans impact the different spheres. Humans use things like fertilizers, herbicides, pesticides, and other chemicals almost daily. There has also been an increased usage of radioactive materials. When these substances are leaked into the atmosphere and rivers, eutrophication, acid rain, and acidifications are only some of the consequences. While temperatures increase with climate change, it's also inevitable that the water temperatures will increase with it, thus resulting in less oxygen in the water and likely less aquatic life. The warmth also causes glaciers and sea ice to melt, which then causes a rise in sea level. Strategies to restore the biomes and mitigation. As less industrial countries grow, it's almost impossible not to burn fossil fuels. This is one of the most prominent reasons for climate change, as the burning of fossil fuels produces greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide and methane. It is difficult to convince other countries' progression to stop, so we need to place our hopes in technological improvements. In the Eastern European forest steppe biome, one of the more tedious ways to mitigate is to restore plants and forests and replant trees. This would be inconvenient, though, as much of the land is used for agriculture and our benefit. However, all possible solutions are currently way too costly or inconvenient, which is why we as individuals must contribute. We can choose to have less luxurious, more sustainable lives, or we can invest in renewable energy rather than fossil fuels. Some of the smaller things we might be able to do would be to change our diet to something less meat based or even smaller and just try to spread awareness of what's happening and how to stop it.